Posthuman, the post-human turn in contemporary culture, organized by Department of English, Midnapore City College. As our institution continues to flourish, it extends its reach towards new horizons, aspiring for even greater heights. The conference stands as a testament to our ongoing journey of excellence, further enhancing the prestige to our college.
In this aspect, we are privileged to be joined by some of the most brilliant intellects and the forward thinkers of our nation. Their wisdom and expertise are certain to enhance our comprehension and inspire innovative solutions. I extend a warm welcome to Dr. Pradeep Ghosh, the Honorable Director of Midnapore City College, to join us on the stage and grace us with his presence. Welcome, sir, to our gathering. Our students will honor our esteemed guest with a felicitation. Let's give him a hearty round of applause.
I would also like to welcome Dr. Sudipto Chakraborty, Principal of Midnapore City College, to grace the stage. Sir, may I kindly invite you to take your place on the stage. Furthermore, I humbly request our students to honor him with their felicitations. I extend a warm welcome to our Vice Principal, Dr. Kuntol Ghosh, to join us on stage. Additionally, I invite our students to honor him with tokens of appreciation.
Allow me to extend a warm welcome to our esteemed guest, Professor Niladri Ranjan Chatterjee, Professor, Head, Department of English, University of Kalyani, West Bengal. I request him to please come on the stage and take his seat. Our students eagerly anticipate the opportunity to felicitate him.
Also join me in welcoming our distinguished guest, Dr. Urmishri Vedamatta, Department of English at Ravenshaw University, Odisha. I invite her to come forward and take her place on stage. I invite our students to honor her with tokens of appreciation.
Furthermore, I would like to extend a similar welcome to our distinguished guest, Dr. Shubhadeep Paul, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Bankura University, West Bengal. I now invite our students to honor him. I would also like to extend I would also like to extend a warm welcome to Dr. Shoikat Sarkar, Assistant Professor, Midnapore College, Autonomous, West Bengal, India. I would like to request the students to honor him with token of appreciation.
Before we move ahead with the insightful sessions of today's seminar, it is our tradition to begin on a harmonious and positive note. Please join us in welcoming Neha, Anisha, and Mrigakshi to present the welcome song.
Hello, hello. Hello. ধুনিলো আহ্বানো মধুর গম্ভীর প্রভাত আম্বর মাঝে দিকে দিগন্তরে ভুবন মন্দিরে শান্তি সঙ্গীত বাজে ধুনিলো রে ধুনিলো রে হ্যারোগো অন্তরে অরূপ সুন্দরে লিখিল সংসারে পরম বন্ধুরে হ্যারোগো অন্তরে অরূপ সুন্দরে লিখিল সংসারে পরম বন্ধুরে এসো আনন্দিত মিলন অঙ্গনে শোভন মঙ্গল সাজে ধুনিল রে ধুনিল রে কলুষ কলমষ বিরোধ বিদ্বেষ হোক নির্মল হোক নিঃশেষ চিত্তে হোক ক্ষত বিঘ্ন অপগত নিত্য কল্যাণ কাজে শরতরঙ্গিয়া গাও বিহঙ্গম পূর্ব পশ্চিম বন্ধু সঙ্গম শরতরঙ্গিয়া গাও বিহঙ্গম পূর্ব পশ্চিম বন্ধু সঙ্গম মৈত্রী বন্ধন পূর্ণ মন্ত্র পবিত্র বিশ্ব সমাজে ধুনিল রে ধুনিল রে ধুনিল আহ্বান মধুর গম্ভীর প্রভাত অম্বর মাঝে দিকে দিগন্তরে ভুবন মন্দিরে শান্তি সঙ্গীত বাজে ধুনিল রে ধুনিল রে নমস্কার
Thank you, dear students. Now, I ask the delegates to commence the ceremonial watering of the plant, symbolizing our commitment to environmental stewardship. Through this gesture, our conference aims to convey a profound message of sustainability. We extend our heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed guest. With this, we formally inaugurate our conference, opening the abstract book. I invite our honored guest to perform this auspicious task. Students, I extend my gratitude for creating the perfect atmosphere for the conference. Now, I kindly ask a distinguished guest to join the audience and take their seats, enriching the gathering with their presence.
Now, I would like to welcome Dr. Sudipto Chakraborty, Principal of Midnapore City College, to come on the stage and introduce our college. Sir, kindly come on the stage.
Distinguished guests of honor, Dr. Pradeep Ghosh, Honorable Director, Midnapore City College, Dr. Kuntal Ghosh, Vice Principal, Midnapore City College, distinguished keynote speakers and resource persons, esteemed members of the organizing committee, faculty, scholars, delegates from across the nation, dear students and guests, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning to all of you. It is my privilege and great pleasure to welcome you to the two-day international seminar hybrid mode on Unmasking the Human, the Posthuman turn in contemporary culture, organizing the Department of Humanities, English, Midnapore City College on 18th and 19th February 2026. This seminar has been thoughtful, designed to foster meaningful engagement through keynote lectures, thematic sessions, paper presentations, and decisions that explore the complex intersections of humanity, technology, ecology, and culture in the contemporary world. I am delighted to note the particular of eminent scholars and speakers such as Professor Niladri Ranjan Chatterjee, University of Kalyani, West Bengal, Professor John Charles Ryan, Professor Senior Research Fellow, Nunglu Institute, University of North Dame, Australia, Professor Urmishri Bedamata, Department of English, Ravenshaw University, Odisha, Professor Apurva Saha, Department of English, Sidhu Kanu Birsa University, Purulia, Dr. Subhadeep Pal, Department of English, Bankura University, Dr. Soikat Sarkar, Department of English, Midnapore College Autonomous, whose insights will greatly enrich our deliberations. Over the course of this session, from the keynote address to the lecture sessions on thematic like rethinking power, post-human linguistics, and the politics of the post-human, I hope we will engage a fruitful dialogue that expands our intellectual horizons and encourages collaborative research. I sincerely appreciate the tireless effort of the organizing committee, faculty members, and students whose dedication has made the academic gathering possible. Your hard work reflects the spirit of scholarship and cooperation that defines our institutions. I warmly welcome all participants, both offline and online, and hope that this seminar will provide stimulating platform for exchanging ideas and building lasting academic connections. With these words, I extend my heartfelt welcome to everyone and wish the seminar a grand success. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now, let us gracefully segue into our conference agenda. I cordially invite the organizing secretary of the seminar, Dr. Rajkumar Bera, Assistant Professor of Midnapore City College, Department of English, to extend a warm welcome Our distinguished guest. Sir, kindly come on the stage.
Very good morning to all of you. First of all, I would like to extend my heartfelt and warm welcome to Dr. Pradip Ghosh, Founder Director of Midnapore City College, then Dr. Sudipta Chakraborty, Principal of Midnapore City College, and Dr. Kuntal Ghosh, Vice Principal of Midnapore City College, and of course then to all the distinguished resource persons, and to all the students, academicians, and research scholars. To this particular platform, academic platform. And we have organized the seminar. There is a certain purpose is there, particularly concentrating on these particular post-human theory. Because we are living in a present condition, actually the problem comes to that particular point when we are thinking about our position, our condition, that how we are getting entrenched with, engaged with, day by day, the different digital platforms, networks, and different kind of technological, techno-human world. So this title of the seminar, Unmasking the Human, and the post-human turn in contemporary culture. The post-human term, the word, the expression, the term is very, very crucial and vital in such respect, because this term, post-human turn, it's a constant, ongoing process that we are just on the way. A culture, when we're talking about post-human culture, of course, because post-human turn means we are getting shifted to from a particular traditional world to the new world, and how we are able to accustom them. And certain questions sometimes comes to everybody's mind, and you know that regarding in such kind of agenda, that are we living in post-human world, or post-humanism itself is a kind of a ideological symptoms of late capitalism. Okay, so these questions sometimes arise in our mind, and of course through the different discourses of our distinguished resource persons, we'll come to know, and we'll just find out the variety of interpretations about the just ongoing development of the post-human theory. And another thing is there, I think that this post-human concept, the very, very concept, all the time it challenges the concept of human. As we know that the concept of human, the idea of human is all the time is getting reconstructed, reimagined, at the same time it is challenged. Okay, so we'll come in course of time about the answers, you know, that whatever we are trying to find through the different kind of discursive representations of our distinguished resource persons. Okay, so I'll not take much time because I wish at the same time the grand success as a convener of the seminar, the entire seminar. And now I would like to request Dr. Shoikat Sarkar, Assistant Professor of English, Midnapore College, please come on the stage, sir, to address the seminar topic, and also to welcome keynote speaker, Professor Niladri Ranjan Chatterjee. Please, sir, come on the stage.
Good morning. Are these working? Okay. Distinguished colleagues, esteemed scholars and students, as a speaker invited to deliver the inaugural address, it is my honor to acknowledge the distinguished leadership of Midnapore City College, Dr. Pradip Ghosh, Founder Director, Dr. Sudipta Chakraborty, Principal, and Dr. Kuntal Ghosh, Vice Principal, whose vision has made this gathering possible. I am equally privileged to share this platform with our keynote speaker, Dr. Niladri Chatterjee, Professor of English, University of Kalyani, and our plenary speakers, Dr. Urmishri Vedamatta from Ravenshaw University and Dr. Shubhadeep Paul from Bankura University. My sincere thanks to the organizers, especially Abhishek Chakraborty, for this invitation. And with a sense of privilege that I am standing before you today to talk holistically on this topic, my task, as has been mentioned, is twofold: to speak briefly on this topic and to introduce our keynote speaker. I wish to offer a synthetic and comprehensive mapping of this burgeoning field called posthumanism. My address will weave together two vital strands of thought: the broad inaugural survey of posthumanism's multiple dimensions and the deep critical theoretical project that seeks to decenter the human entirely. By fusing these perspectives, we can construct a richer, more nuanced understanding of the posthuman turn, one that acknowledges its diverse genealogies, its contested present, and its urgent ethical future. So I'll roughly speak about 20 minutes. Long before the current technological acceleration, cultural imaginaries across the world were already grappling with the questions that now define our discourse. In the Bengali cultural sphere, Satyajit Ray's 1986 story Onukul presented the figure of the android, a humanoid domestic help named Onukul, who appears to possess an independent mind and a capacity for ethical deliberation. This inquiry was revitalized in Sujoy Ghosh's 2017 film adaptation, where Onukul is depicted as a reader of the Mahabharata and the Gita, engaging in profound discourse on moral conflicts. The humanoid in this sense represents humanity's other, aligning posthumanism with the broader academic project of centering the marginalized, a lineage that includes feminist critiques of sexual disparity and extends to race, caste, colonialism, disability, and animal studies. By inquiring into the rights and natures of non-human beings, we perform a working through of humanist discourse, as Neil Badminton suggests. This is not merely a search for a subsequent developmental state of humanity, but an investigation into how the concept of the human collapses into various sub, inter, trans, and anti-categories. Simultaneously, Western literature and speculative fiction have functioned as primary apparatuses for both inventing and dismantling the human. Contemporary fiction relentlessly destabilizes the notion of compulsory humanity by drawing attention to its constructed nature. Consider the ontological liminality of Octavia Butler's Fledgling, whose genetically modified protagonist, Shori, blurs the boundaries between the human and the vampire. Ursula Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness problematizes the assumption that a fixed biological sex is requisite for human normalcy, proposing a post-gender world where identities are fluid and interchangeable. These literary interrogations are supplemented by works like Merge Pierce's Woman on the Edge of Time, which depicts inmates implanted with neurotransmitters to control behavior, a theme rooted in actual 1960s medical experiments, illustrating how normalcy is enforced through the removal of cognitive and emotive capacities. Further examples abound. Stephanie Meyer's Vegetarian Vampires, who replicate human family structures, Arnold Schwarzenegger's alien cyborg in the Terminator franchise, which inexplicably develops emotional affiliations, the genetic determinist society of Gattaca, Kazuo Ishiguro's clones raised as organ donors in Never Let Me Go, and Catherine Dunn's Geek Love, which offers a radical political critique of personhood by blurring the normal deviant binary. Collectively, these texts emphasize the blurring of bodily borders and consciousness, rendering it impossible to isolate the human from the human-machine assemblage or other forms of life. They prepare the ground for what we now term critical posthumanism, the radical decentering of the traditional sovereign, coherent and autonomous human to demonstrate how the human is always already evolving with, constituted by, and constitutive of multiple forms of life and machines. Defining the terrain, if we try to, posthumanism is an inherently interdisciplinary and consequently difficult to define field. As Stephen Harbrechter observes, the very punctuation of the term is significant. Post-humanism often signifies a deconstructive critique of the humanist traditions, while posthuman-isms points towards a philosophical investigation into engineered future beings. To navigate this terminological fluidity, we must adopt a rigorous typology. Matthew Gladden provides a vital framework distinguishing between 1. Posthumanization. This is the social dynamics through which non-biological members are integrated into social structures. 2. Posthumanity. The collective intelligent beings, synthetic, hybrid or biological, resulting from these processes. 3. Posthumanism. The conceptual framework that takes these phenomena as its object of study. And 4. Posthuman, a generic term encompassing the process, the entities and the body of thought. Furthermore, Francesca Ferrando emphasizes that posthumanism is defined by its post-anthropocentrism. It challenges the hierarchical social constructs and human-centric assumptions that have historically prioritized the human over all other forms of existence. In this view, the posthuman subject is not a unified autonomous entity, but a multiple embedded subject, one who is not separate from their environment or the technologies that serve as extensions of the self. We must also recognize the deep genealogy of these ideas. Michel Foucault's archaeology of thought suggested that man is an invention of recent date and perhaps nearing its end. Even earlier, Friedrich Nietzsche's Übermensch, or the overhuman, serves as a philosophical ancestor to contemporary transhumanist thought. Thus, posthumanism is not a sudden rupture, but a critical practice occurring inside humanism, acknowledging that humanism is the thing that has shaped our identity and cannot be instantly erased. Within this broad field, three dominant paradigms emerge. 1. Traditional humanism, the Enlightenment model premised upon a universal rational subject, historically coded as male, possessing an inherent essence rooted in the rational mind. 2. Transhumanism, often conflated with posthumanism, transhumanism is what Carrie Wolf describes as an intensification of humanism. It views the biological body as a series of limitations to be transcended through applied science. Nick Bostrom argues that human nature is improvable through interventions that increase health span and intellectual capacity. This posthumanism often functions as a hagiography of techno-modifications, treating technology as a means of adding to an already existing human self. However, transhumanism remains anthropocentric and techno-deterministic. Critics label it as a white mythology because it retrieves the myth of the white man's technological superiority. 3. Critical posthumanism. In stark contrast, critical posthumanism rejects both human exceptionalism and human instrumentalism, the belief that humans have a right to control the natural world. It posits that the human is co-evolving and sharing ecosystems and genetic material with other life forms, and that technology is not a mere prosthesis but is integral to identity. Unlike transhumanists who seek disembodiment, critical posthumanism emphasizes embedded embodiment. Adapting work from cognitive sciences and systems biology, it argues that human complexity is a consequence of the system's openness to the environment. The transition to posthumanism was facilitated by critical humanisms that exposed the exclusionary nature of the universal man. These deconstructive projects provide the necessary groundwork for any serious posthumanist inquiry. We may here mention of the Foucauldian anti-humanism, as he demonstrated that the human subject is not the origin of knowledge but an effect of knowledge power regimes. We can also talk about the feminist reconfigurations. Feminist critics such as Susan Bordeaux, Nancy Hartsock, and others reveal that the universal human has hierarchically and historically been coded as masculine, relegating the feminine to the status of the other. Technoscience studies and material discursive phenomena argue that Homo sapiens has always been Homo faber, man the maker, Bernard Stiegler posits that the human requires non-living organs to survive, supported by prostheses for millions of years. Donna Haraway presents the cyborg as a liminal creature that breaks the dualisms of animal/human and man/woman. Karen Barad further demonstrates that the human emerges in the interaction of discourse and materiality. Bodies are not sub-objects with inherent boundaries but are material discursive phenomena. Then there are critical race studies and the colonial trace. They expose the link between Enlightenment humanism, racism, and colonial expansion. To move forward, we may understand, or we may try to understand, the four principal categories that define this field: critical, cultural, philosophical, and biopolitical posthumanism. These pillars offer complementary lenses through which to examine the posthuman condition. Critical posthumanism, as outlined before, this branch utilizes deconstructive methodologies to dismantle humanist binaries. It challenges speciesism, the belief in human supremacy, and critiques the mythologization of projects like the Human Genome Project. It argues that there is no ideal DNA code representing humanity, as DNA is merely one component with an average role to play. This branch shares Anne Catherine Hale's insistence on the embodied self, viewing technology not as a divine savior or a terrifying other, but as an integral part of our increasingly technologized life. Cultural posthumanism. As Judith Halberstam and Ira Livingstone suggest, cultural posthumanism views posthumanity as an existing reality. It applies the tools of cultural studies to analyze how literature, film, and digital media articulate the collapse of the monolithic human subject into sub, inter, trans, and anti-states. It investigates how our cultural imagination, particularly science fiction, betrays our fears and desires regarding posthumanization. Philosophical posthumanism. In contrast to the analysis of the present, philosophical posthumanism focuses on hypothetical future possibilities. It integrates the insights of the previous two branches into traditional philosophical inquiry to reassess ontological, epistemological, and phenomenological questions. It conducts dispassionate thought experiments into what it means to be non-human. We see this reality emerging in our smart homes, where AI like Alexa or Google Home map our private lives and use algorithms to regulate our choices, creating an ecosystem where the physical and digital are differentiated only by degree and not by kind. The fourth pillar, biopolitical posthumanism, is a practical and future-oriented pillar aiming to influence political or regulatory action. This is the site of the debate between bioconservatism and techno-progressivism. Bioconservatives like Francis Fukuyama warned that biotechnology could reshape human nature with malign consequences for liberal democracy and human rights. Conversely, techno-progressives like Gregory Stock and Robert Pepperell advocate for embracing these advancements, seeing the synthesis of intelligence and consciousness as a necessary evolution. A central tension in our discourse concerns the nature of consciousness. Anne Catherine Hales, in a seminal work, How We Became Posthuman, critiqued techno-idealists like Hans Moravec. Moravec argued that human consciousness is essentially a pattern of information that could be downloaded into a computer, effectively achieving immortality by replacing biological neurons with electronic replicas. Hales counters this by asserting that information cannot exist without a physical instantiation. There are many other examples, but I guess the other speakers will be addressing the area. This area is, as I have mentioned, is burgeoning. So there are many things to talk about, and I hope that over the next 2 days, the seminar, the conference, will address the various strands of posthumanist thought. So let me finish by saying that critical posthumanism provides a framework for this different mode one where we finally recognize that to be one is always to become with many. It is my sincere hope that the discussion over the coming 2 days will advance this crucial project, weaving together the diverse threads. I have tried to outline here some of the some of the ideas which I believe will be synthesized to a coherent, compassionate and forward-looking tapestry of thought. With these words, I thank you all for your patient listening. Now let me have this pleasure of introducing Professor Niladri Ranjan Chatterjee, the keynote speaker of this seminar. Professor Niladri Ranjan Chatterjee is an Indian academic, author and public intellectual known for his significant contributions to English literature, gender studies and cultural studies. He has been a senior faculty member and head of the department in the Department of English at the University of Kalyani, where he has over 30 years of teaching experience. His doctoral research focused on the novelist Christopher Isherwood. He has been awarded prestigious international fellowships including Fulbright Scholarship, studied at University of Texas at Austin, and British Council Charles Wallace Fellowship at the University of Cambridge. Professor Chatterjee's work spans academic writing, editing, translation, fiction, visual arts, and active participation in social and queer movements. He is the translator of the books Entering the Maze, Queer Fiction of Krishna Gopal Mollik, and the author of the novel The Scholar. He edited the books Androgyny and Female Impersonation in India, Nari Bhav, and The Muffled Heart, Stories of the Disempowered Male. Professor Chatterjee received a Rainbow Award for Literature and Journalism in 2023 in recognition of his contributions to queer literature and scholarship. He regularly appears at literary festivals and discussions, including sessions at the APJ Kolkata Literary Festival to speak about queer narratives and queer culture. With these words, let me have the honor of welcoming to the stage Dr. Niladri Ranjan Chatterjee.
Thank you so much, Shoykot, for that incredibly kind introduction. It's always embarrassing when you're introduced like this. One hopes that one would be a little bit critical in the introduction, but that hardly ever happens. I'm very grateful to Midnapore City College for inviting me here. This is my first visit to the campus, and I'm already liking it enormously. I think I am over here under very false pretenses. Post-humanity is definitely not my area of work. I feel like a trespasser. So if after hearing me, you decide that calling me was a bad idea, I will agree with you. So what I really wish to do today is start by looking at the way in which we understand human even now, and how tenacious that understanding is, that even after all the talk about post-humanism and transhumanism, transhumanism of course is a different kind of fascism, so even after all of this, somehow the category of human seems so tenacious that it seems very difficult for us to dislodge it. And I think the culprit, as in almost all instances, the culprit is language. So therefore, I have been teaching a course in gender studies since 2009. It was a very different world then. So in 2009, when students signed up for my gender studies class, oh, and by the way, I called it New Gender Studies. And the reason why I called it New Gender Studies is because I wanted to use, our late capitalist understanding of the word new when we attach it to a product. So therefore, when we are sold a detergent powder, or when we are sold a toothpaste, and when the toothpaste branding comes with the word new and improved, we all know that it is a lie, and it is a lie that we understand because we don't believe, capitalists, quite rightly. So therefore, what really happens is that new improved is something that we know that nothing is going to be new about it, nothing is going to be improved about it, but we still buy it, because we like it that way. So when I chose to call my course New Gender Studies, I was hoping, and I succeeded, I was hoping that the Postgraduate Board of Studies is going to look at my syllabus and they're going to say, oh, new gender studies. Oh, so basically it is going to be the old gender studies, but new and improved. We pass it. So therefore, when my new gender studies course was passed, it was passed in the belief that I shall be restating the old gender studies thing. And the old gender studies thing, the way in which I have understood it in the course of my 30 years of teaching, is that it can be summed up in 4 words. Men bad, women sad. That's it. Bye-bye. My lecture is over. So what really happens then is, so when people thought that I was, going to offer a course in new gender studies, oh yes, of course we know what it's going to be. Men bad, women sad. We pass it. Because you see, this is a discourse that we are used to. This is comfortable. Men bad, women sad. Yes? So therefore, it's comfortable, it's easy, we are fluent in it, and so the Board of Studies decided that it was not going to challenge anybody anyway. Oh my God. And then the course began. And then they realized that it's not going to be the men bad, women sad thing. It is going to be more like the status update that Facebook is very fond of when you are talking about the relationship status. It's complicated. So therefore, it's not so easy. And so, I was reading one of the abstracts, and in the abstract, I found a reference to Queen Elizabeth I. And by the way, Queen Elizabeth I's 2 speeches I teach as a text in the MA syllabus. And I thought it was really, really refreshing that a woman is being acknowledged as human. Because that's not the way we think. And the problem, as I started to say before, lies in the language. I am going to give you 2 examples of that. The first example is going to be the way in which the word human begins to take shape. And the second, of course, is going to be from one of the Indian languages. And I think that is going to, well, actually 2 examples from Indian languages, which is going to make it very clear for you to understand exactly where the problem began and why the problem is so persistent. So, say for example, let me start with human. Okay. Let's look at the word homo. Yes? So if you look at the word homo, that comes from Latin, and this is precisely where the problem begins, because right there in the word homo is the problem, because homo means man and human. That, my friends, is the problem. Because the moment one word means man and human, then do you see what is happening? What is happening is that man and human are becoming indistinguishable. So then man begins to circulate in society as the sexless, genderless, and my favorite, bodiless human. So therefore men don't have bodies, Men don't have sex, men don't have gender, men are human, unmarked. Women are hypermarked. They have the body, they have the gender, they have the sex. Women are fixed. Men are free-floating. And nobody understands that better than public transport. The general compartment. I will always be grateful to the lady who approached me one day when I was waiting for my train at Kollani University. I was sitting there on the platform. This lady, perfectly nice, well-meaning lady, she comes up to me and she says, "Ekhane to gents der coach, na?" So I had to drink some water. And then I said, "Gents der to kono coach nei bodhai." And then she looked at me with utter bafflement, and she obviously thought I was an idiot, which I was. And she said, "Ota ladies coach? J coach ladies den noy?" And she was very patient with me because she knew that I was an idiot. So she had to break it down. She said, "Let me explain this to you like you're a 5-year-old. Ota ladies coach? Jeta ladies coach noy? Ota gents course." And I thought, that is true. That is true. And not only is it true, so therefore do you see, the general and the male are coterminous, interchangeable. Yes, very lovely. Very, very liberatory. Yeah. So therefore what really begins to happen is that homo then circulates as man and human. And it is from that that we get the word humanus. Humanus is the adjective. It is from humanus that we get human. So you see, human at its very genesis is already male. The human is already male. So therefore, when people talk about, "Sir, we are extremely progressive as an English department, we are offering a paper in women's writing." So I said, that is absolutely wonderful. When are you offering a course in men's writing? Sir, why do we need men's writing? So I said, "Oh, that's right. We don't need men's writing because where are the men anyway, right? Because men don't exist. Human exists. Men don't. So this is where the problem arises. Come to an Indian language. My favorite name of a party, Aam Aadmi Party. I love that. I love that. So therefore, whenever I tell anybody who supports the Aam Aadmi Party, so I said, "But she said, excuse me, don't you think that there's a problem with the naming of your party?" "What problem, sir?" So I said, "Well, it's called Aam Aadmi Party. Aadmi equals man." And they say, "Sir, you don't know." I don't. "You don't know. Aadmi, sir, means, sir, human, sir." So I said, "Oh, that's absolutely wonderful. So are you trying to tell me that in the Aam Aadmi Party, women are allowed?" "Yes, sir." So I said, "Oh, wait. So women are human too?" "Yes, sir." Okay, hold on to that thought. If women are human, if I start an Aam Aurat Party, men would be allowed, right? "No, sir." "Okay, why? Aren't you human?" "Yes, sir." "Women are human?" "Yes, sir." "So you can be a part of the Aam Aurat Party, right?" "No, sir." You see the problem. So therefore, when we talk about humanism, we are automatically talking about masculinism. Humanism is manism. Yes. I was telling somebody that when I was traveling in the car on my way here, that I am going to unleash a new term at this seminar. And the time has come for me to unleash a new term. I think I am not in favor of Anthropocene anymore. The reason why I am not in favor of Anthropocene is because the anthropo, again, assumes that the anthropo is the human. But the human is the male. So let us call Anthropocene by the term that it should be called by, Andropocene. I'll leave you with that thought. So we are going to, I would much rather people refer to the Andropocene, because the time that we think of as the Anthropocene, if you look at the history of how Anthropocene develops, it's all about the men. Women play no role in that at all. So therefore, our understanding of what the human is not anthropocentric, it is androcentric. And the sooner we acknowledge it, the better it will be for us to try and understand why we have landed ourselves in this horrible, horrible mess. Jeffrey Epstein. नाम तो सुना होगा. You thought that this bubble of academia is cushioned from that monster. No. And the reason why I am going to talk about Jeffrey Epstein is because Jeffrey Epstein, I recently found, I was so happy, thank God for Jeffrey Epstein. I recently found that he believed in cryogenics, good man. He believed in cryogenics and he hoped to freeze his head and his penis. Okay. I'll think about that. His head and his penis for future use of eugenics, because, you know, he's God. Future use of eugenics and transhumanism. Jeffrey Epstein, an advocate of transhumanism. As I said at the beginning of my talk, transhumanism is a kind of fascism. You know, in the introductory address, you know, Nietzsche's theorization of the Übermensch was mentioned. So therefore, and of course we have another person in English literature who also talks about it. Yeah, George Bernard Shaw, Man and Superman. So therefore we already have that sense of, you know, the perfectibility of the human, but that human is almost always the man. So we are not really talking about perfecting the human, we are talking about perfecting the man. So what I really wish to talk about, by the way, how much time do I have left? I would want somebody to stop me because I tend to go on, because I do like the sound of my voice. I've got 20 minutes more, okay, good. So what I really wish to talk about then is the way in which we, even when we look at grammar, we find that there's a very interesting patriarchal problem that arises when we are translating, for example, Prothom Purush to first person. How does Purush become person unproblematically? Also then Purush is also just a person, genderless, sexless, bodiless. What we also have to think about is the way in which a certain kind of binary is created. And the central binary that I'm talking about, this is the binary with which patriarchy is very, very comfortable. That is the binary of the mind and the body. And if you look at the vast, expanse of literature, you will find that the body is consistently gendered female and the mind is consistently gendered male. So the mind-body binary then becomes again the male-female binary. So there is a way in which the patriarchal deep structure gets into our understanding of how we think about the body as well. So in any body, we have the mind and the body, but what is interesting is that if you are gender assigned female at birth, there will be a lot of vigilance and patriarchal care taken of your body. But if you're gender assigned male, a lot of care will be taken of your mind. Men will be therefore consistently encouraged to basically put your body in danger. Men are encouraged to put their body in danger, because when man is putting his body in danger, which part of him is he putting in danger? The female part. So therefore, please make your body suffer. Your body is the woman part of you. And it's not as though I am saying this. It is not as though I am saying this. My favorite people on earth, the ancient Greeks with whom I talk daily, they are the ones who said it. They are the ones who said it. So therefore, since I have mentioned Jeffrey Epstein's penis, which will not go away, I will also refer to Greek statues. Many of you have seen images of Greek statues. Many of you have also seen a copy, not a copy, but a sculpture that was inspired by Greek statuary, namely Michelangelo's David. Many of you have seen pictures of David. Whenever I show the picture of David in class, titters break out. There are people who are giggling behind their hands, and I know exactly what they're giggling about. So I say, okay, because I don't encourage laughing in my class. But the weird thing is that everybody in my class laughs. I don't know why. I say the most serious things, the class is rolling on the floor. I can't seem to get them interested in the serious things that I say. So I said, okay, cool down, you people. What is all this laughter about? No, sir, nothing, sir. I know what you're laughing about. Out with it. Come on, tell me, we are all friends together. I'm not. But I pretend that I'm their friend. So I tell them, tell me. And then they say, sir, so I said, you want to talk about David's penis, don't you? No, sir. No, yes, sir. Your problem is, why is David's penis so small? Isn't that what you want to know? No, sir. Yes, sir. No, sir. Yes, sir. So I said, I'll tell you why it is so small. It is small because Michelangelo was actually trying to replicate a certain prototype of the male figure which he had seen in ancient Greek statuary. In ancient Greek statues, they have very small, they have very small crown jewels. So you think, why is the penis so small? The penis is so small, not because Greek men all had small penises, that may not be possible, but because the penis stood for sexual pleasure, and a small penis meant that you were not interested or you were not supposed to be interested in sexual pleasure. If you were not interested in sexual pleasure, you were not interested in pleasuring your body. If you were not interested in pleasuring your body, you were male. That was the logic. So the small penis, therefore, represented true masculinity, not the other way around. The big penis, on the other hand, represented poor masculinity. Why? Because you were much more interested in pleasuring your body. Remember, the body was the female part of you. So if you pleasured your body, you became more of a woman, less of a man. So that is the logic that is working with the way in which the body is consistently denigrated. And this is so tenacious, that a few years ago, there was a spate of motorcycle accidents happening in Calcutta. And the police had become very, very strict about the wearing of helmets. So therefore, there were a lot of checkings that were going on, and people were expected to wear the helmet. And I remember passing by one petrol pump, this particular biker, who happened to be living in the neighborhood, he had come into the petrol pump to get his tank filled. And he was wearing a helmet. Now, I will never forget that at the petrol pump was one of his friends, and the friend looked at him and he said, with a great deal of what shall I say, insult in his voice, he said, "Bhai, tu your helmet." So wearing the helmet then becomes a matter of shame. So if you wear the helmet, you are taking care of your head. Your head belongs to your body. If you take care of your body, then you become a woman. Perfect. Makes perfect sense to me. So whenever people ask me, Niladrida, what is your definition of a perfect man? So I said, because I've done a lot of research. I have the definition of a perfect man. A perfect man is somebody who smokes and destroys his lungs, who drinks and destroys his liver, who rides a bike without a helmet, cracks his skull and dies. Perfect man with a cracked skull. You see the way in which we continue to valorize that sense of masculinity, especially in popular Bollywood cinema. We all know the names. Kabir Singh. We all know the names. Animal. Not human. Animal. So therefore, we are looking at the way in which the human itself as a category needs special care in unpacking before we start to unmask it. So the unmasking of the human then is basically and this is something which, posthumanism does extremely well, to say that human is a construct by not humans, by men. It is not all humans who've participated in that construction, it is men. So many of us have actually heard the phrase, man's inhumanity to man. Many of us are aware of this phrase, Robert Burns, 1785. Man's inhumanity to man. The irony of it is that inhumanity is something that only the human is capable of. So what is interesting is that when you say, oh, why can't you be more human? We are only looking at the human as an idealized form of the Homo sapien. But what is interesting is that the violence that is perpetrated, man's inhumanity to man, that is not perpetrated by an animal species. It is perpetrated by one human on the other. So therefore, what I am really trying to stress, and I'm sure that in the papers that are going to be read out over the next 2 days, are going to bear me out, that we need to therefore understand very, very carefully that yes, not only is the term human problematic, but what we should understand is that the construction of human is in itself patriarchal. It is not problematic for any other reason. It is problematic for the reason that the term human is exclusionary. And in the 10 minutes that I have left, what I shall really talk about, I'm not going to take all of the 10 minutes, you've suffered me long enough. But what I would really want to take the time that is left is to say how patriarchy functions when we are thinking about the human. It isn't just about gender. It isn't just about gender. So then what really happens is that in the creation of that human, you have other, variables that are added. Race, caste, class, ethnicity, religion, community, region. So all of these variables, they construct the human. Let us go a little bit back to ancient Greece. Let us talk about the way in which Athens saw citizenship. We think that democracy is such a good idea because it was given to us by the Greeks. Well, the Greek democracy was not for everyone. You only had to be a freeborn Athenian male to enjoy the full fruits of democracy. So the demos, that is to say, the population, the society, that did not take account of the slaves, that did not take account of the women, that did not take account of people from other city-states, people from Sparta, people from Crete. No, they were not a part of it. It was only the Athenians. So what we are really looking at then is that the term human, please let us understand it as automatically exclusionary. The common field of humanity doesn't exist. It's a contradiction in terms. Because the moment you talk about the common field of humanity, you're actually going against the way in which the term humanity evolved. And that is something that we should probably keep in mind. Also, when we are doing our studies in posthumanism, we should be, and I'm sure this is something that, a lot of feminist scholars, queer scholars, they have already participated in it, and we just need to keep reminding ourselves, we just have to keep reminding ourselves that every time we create a term, this is what we should be aware of. Is that term inclusive enough? If it isn't inclusive enough, what is it leaving out? Is that leaving out ethical? So then what we really have to do is, when we are looking at posthumanism, which I'm sure those of us who practice posthumanism are convinced that it is the ethical turn, but we constantly need to hold our exercise ethically accountable. Because it is very easy for us to fall into a certain kind of binarization where we unconsciously discriminate against people that we don't like for whatever reason. So what are the politics of exclusion? That is something that I would want us to keep in mind. Who gets to be posthuman? Who gets to be not quite, not white? Because, of course, again, like most theory, posthumanism doesn't start in the third world. Even posthumanism starts there. So then what you will have to see is, then if posthumanism is starting out there, not here, then should we not be a little bit more skeptical of the way? And when I say skeptical, I'm not saying, dismiss it. Don't dismiss it. Just be, like Shoykot pointed out in the introduction, be critically posthumanist. And that is something that we really should keep in mind. We should be a little bit less totally enthusiastic about the posthuman term. And the reason why we should be a little bit less celebratory about it is because the moment we let go of the term human, along with it, we lose the politics of its coinage. And I think it is important for us to keep the politics of coinage, because that will make us aware of the mistake that we did in coining it in the first place. That is why when some of my students say, "Sir, why we've had enough, we've heard enough of patriarchy, it's a very old term. Why can't we have a new term?" And I said, we can't have the new term because patriarchy is still fully functional. It hasn't gone anywhere. If anything, and if the Jeffrey Epstein scandal has made us aware of anything at all, it is that patriarchy is thriving. It is absolutely thriving. So therefore, I am actually going to end my talk today by again referring to Queen Elizabeth I, and to say that here was somebody who was constantly doing a tightrope walk as far as her own gender was concerned, because she knew that she had a tremendous disadvantage in being gender assigned female at birth, which is why she would say very famously that I may have the body of a woman, but I have the stomach of a king. She would be the one who would consistently refer to herself as a prince, not a princess. So Queen Elizabeth I was, she was using or deploying gender. She was deploying gender to beat patriarchy at their own game. I think that's a pretty good example of the way in which we can start to think about transhumanity. So once we are done being critical, and of course this is a project that doesn't end, it is constantly to be invigilated. Once that is, in full force, we can therefore have a slightly more muscular engagement with posthumanism. And I'm sure that in the papers that are coming after me, there will be adequate reason for optimism. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your insightful and inspiring address that has greatly enriched our understanding and set a meaningful tone for the seminar. The moment has arrived for the commencement of our technical sessions. With utmost humility, I invite Professor Urmishri Bedamatta, Department of English, Ravenshaw University, Orissa. This session will be chaired by Professor Niladri Ranjan Chatterjee, a distinguished professor, Department of English, University of Kalyani, West Bengal. Kindly come on the stage, ma'am.
Sorry. Welcome to the first plenary session of the seminar. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce Professor Unmishri Bedamatta, who is professor in the Department of English and founder, coordinator of the Center for Translation and Digital Humanities at Ravenshaw University. Professor Bedamatta engages primarily with Odia history, Odia literary, cultural, and intellectual history, with a particular focus on manuscript cultures and the colonial Odia public sphere. Her research brings together literary history, translation studies, and digital humanities, including work on textual variants, annotation practices, and pedagogy. She has published in journals such as South Asian History and Culture, Nationalities, Papers, and other prestigious journals, and has edited and translated several works of Odia literature in religious traditions. Her current work engages questions of indigenous knowledge systems, regional literary publics, and digital approaches to South Asian textual archives. I have had the pleasure of having a very brief conversation with Professor Bedamatta this morning. We had a wonderful time. I learned so much about the work that she does, and I very much look forward to hearing her now. Professor Bedamatta.
Thank you, Professor Chatterjee. Before, how much time I've just... 40 minutes, okay. So, thank you all. Thank you the officials of Midnapore City College and Rajkumar especially for inviting me over. Before I begin my talk, I ask of you to be gentle with ourselves and gentle yet firm in our attempt to know the field, to be kshetragya. Most importantly, given the times we are in, I shudder to call myself an expert. I was therefore somewhat surprised when Rajkumar asked me to speak at a conference such as this. In fact, he did not ask me, he commanded me. I appreciated the way he exercised his adhikar over me, and so I'm here. And so without claiming familiarity with the many lives of posthumanism, and fully risking the exposure of my own ignorance in this field I venture, my talk draws on a particular kind of primary source, manuscript literature, and I will attempt to address the posthuman question, specifically the question of how humans and non-humans are related to one another through my reading of these materials. So that was a sort of preamble. Let me begin my actual talk. When I first read Lytton Strachey's Elizabeth and Essex, A Tragic History, I was a student of literature in what was then unself-consciously called the Third World, a phrase that placed us somewhere between invisibility and apology, a phrase we used without irony, as though we had accepted our place in the global order, somewhere between the forgotten and the apologetic. My Unmasking the Human moment came not from theory, but from Strachey's portrait of Queen Elizabeth. I remember reading that text and being quietly stunned. The great queen of English history, the virgin queen of our textbooks, was suddenly before me in her old age. Her teeth yellow, her face thick with powder, her body decaying beneath her silks. Strachey had pulled away the mask of majesty to show us not a symbol, but a woman, proud, frightened, clinging to beauty and power as both slipped away. For me, that image was more than a historical revelation. In the figure of the aging queen, I saw the fragility of the human itself, its dependence on illusion, on masks of beauty and power. That early encounter, before I had words like posthumanism or decoloniality, was my first intimation that the human had never been a universal category. It was always an invention, maintained by performance and belief, and always waiting to be unmasked. Something in me shifted that day. It wasn't that just Elizabeth who had been unmasked. It was the whole idea of the human I had been taught to admire. The human of greatness, of reason, of refinement, now looked fragile and painfully and embarrassingly mortal. I realized that what we call the human had always depended on keeping certain others unseen, those of us outside the golden frame of history. This was my first glimpse of what I would later come to recognize as the posthuman turn. The moment when the mask cracks and the human steps down from its pedestal to stand among the rest, flawed and unfinished. That early glimpse feels uncannily relevant now. We are once again watching the mask slip, this time not from a monarch's face, but from the very category of the human itself. The AI sandstorm that now swirls around us has forced the question out into the open. What remains of the human when machines learn, write, paint, and desire? What happens to agency, authorship, or consciousness when algorithms mirror our thinking and sometimes outpace it? But AI is only one part of the disturbance. Climate catastrophe, genetic editing, surveillance capitalism, and the hyper-fragmented digital self, all these contingencies have converged to make us aware that the boundaries of the human were never stable to begin with. If the posthuman reminds us that the human was never singular, this is not a new discovery for us. The Indian philosophical imagination, from the Upanishadic notion of the Atman as part of a larger Brahman, to Jain and Buddhist ideas of interbeing and impermanence, has always viewed existence as fluid, relational, and transmaterial. What we now call posthuman might be another name for a very old insight, that the human does not end at the skin, and that consciousness is not the private property of our species. So before I go further into the Indian tradition, I want to pause for a brief look at how the posthuman has been theorized in the global academy, but I think I won't go into that now. I won't go into the theorizations. We are more or less aware of what it is. There's Cyborg Manifesto, which has already been referred to, and Professor Shoikat has already referred to a lot of theorization in that field. So if I look, when I turn to the Indian tradition, I do not do so to claim precedence or spiritual superiority. I do it to recall a different grammar of being, one that never quite separated the human from the non-human, the material from the moral, or the animate from the inert. The Upanishad spoke of the self, the Atman, as continuous with the Brahman, the larger field of consciousness that pervades all things. Jain and Buddhist traditions saw existence as an endless interdependence of life forms, each carrying awareness in varying degrees. And yet, when we speak of the Indian imagination as one that recognized the agency of rivers, mountains, and trees, it is worth remembering that it was always the human who worshipped. The human stood before the tree or the river, not as master, but as devotee. Worship itself was a form of acknowledgement, a way of saying, I am not central here. In this gesture of reverence, the human decentered itself long before theory gave us the language of the posthuman. The act of worship was a philosophical statement that value and vitality are not confined to the human form, that the sacred flows through all existence. If I were to look for an Indian language of the posthuman, I would begin not in philosophy but in poetry, in what we call the Mahatmya literature. These texts of reverence, and these are all extracted from the manuscripts that we have been reading for the past few years, the Ganga Mahatmya, the Kashi Mahatmya, the Prachi Mahatmya, the Purushottam Mahatmya, and there are many other such Mahatmyas, not only in the Sanskrit tradition but also in the Indian vernacular traditions. These texts of reverence are in many ways the descendants of the Vedic literature, and in these Mahatmya literature we have hymns that address the world as a living presence. The Vedic poets, for example, did not describe nature, they spoke to it. They saw the day, they saw the dawn as a maiden, Ushas, emerging each morning in beauty, the sun as a radiant sun, Surya riding his chariot across the sky. The Mahatmyas continue this mode of address. They transform geography into theology. Rivers, mountains, cities are considered sentient beings with memory, mood, and will. To read them today is to realize that what we call posthuman was, in another idiom, already a way of seeing, a poetics of reciprocity between the human and the more than human world. In the human in the Indian imagination was never, if the human in the Indian imagination was never sovereign, it was because the human always already stood in reverence before the more than human world. As I said, it was the human who worshipped, the one who looked up, who folded hands before the tree, the river, the mountain, the land. Worship here was not submission to power, it was recognition of presence. The act of namaskara, of bowing, is in itself an ontology. It acknowledges that agency and vitality reside beyond the human body, that consciousness is a shared field. It is in this sense that I turn to what I like to call Mahatmya literature. Each of these texts continues a very old poetic intuition. The Mahatmyas take rivers, mountains, cities and give them voice, temperament and memory. The Ganga does not merely flow. She listens, forgives, remembers. Purushottam Kshetra, or Kashi for that matter, is not a city but a consciousness. In these texts, geography becomes theology and theology becomes ecology, a seamless continuum of the living and the sacred. And I argue that the Mahatmya is not a mythic residue of a pre-scientific age. It is an epistemology of relationship, a way of recognizing that meaning is not made by humans alone. In our own time, as post-human theory calls upon us to decenter the human and to rediscover the agency of the non-human, the Mahatmya texts offer a precedent, but also a correction. Where the Western post-human often arises from critique and crisis, the Mahatmya arises from intimacy and awe. It tells us that to unmask the human is not necessarily to erase it, but to remind it of its proper place as a participant, not proprietor, as one who worships, not one who owns. I often think that what I am calling the Mahatmya mode is not a matter of belief but of bearing. It is a disposition towards the world, an awareness that the world addresses us back. It has nothing to do with ritual orthodoxy or sectarian piety and everything to do with how we inhabit our surroundings. Generations of Indians, whether they could read the Mahatmyas or not, have lived by its quiet rhythm. For example, we feed the cow before eating, leave a part of the harvest for birds, bathe in the river as though entering a presence. These gestures were not superstition, they were ethics made habitual, a way of keeping the human in conversation with the world. Today, many of us who are educated in the secular rationalist idiom of modernity are uneasy with this mode. We dismiss it as pre-modern sentiment or religious residue. But perhaps what we are rejecting is not faith, but finitude, the acceptance that the human does not stand alone. The Mahatmya mode teaches precisely this: how to live meaningfully within limits, how to sustain relationships without domination. It is in its deepest sense an epistemology of humility. That is why, in an age shaken by the AI sandstorm, by ecological unraveling and digital overreach, the Mahatmya mode deserves to be remembered, not as a return to the past, but as a resource for the future. When we speak of unmasking the human today, we usually mean exposing its illusions of mastery, its will to control. The Mahatmya offers another gesture. It teaches us how to bow, how to listen. It unmarks the human not through critique, but through care. In the world that is coming, automated, accelerated, and because of it anxious, we may need that older rhythm again, a mode of reverence that anchors the intellect in gratitude, the imagination in reciprocity. To unmask the human finally is to see it as it truly is, not the ruler of the world, but one small participant in its vast singing web. And here I must pause over the very word that gathers us today, unmasking. It is a powerful word, but also a restless one. To unmask is to expose, to strip away, to confront. It carries the scent of accusation, as though truth must be torn from concealment, as though revelation demands a kind of violence. Perhaps that is why the word unsettles me. For in the Mahatmya mode, truth is not wrested from the world, it is received. Knowledge does not come from forcing the mask off, but from recognizing that the mask itself is a form of meaning, the way the world protects and reveals itself at once. In this sense, the Mahatmya teaches us a gentler epistemology. It asks us not to unmask but to behold, to see without appropriation, to understand without violation. The dawn need not be unmasked to be known, it must only be witnessed. The human does not become wiser by stripping the world bare, but by standing quietly within its shimmering opacity. If I may risk a paradox, what makes us human may not be our capacity to unmask the world, but our capacity to let it remain partially veiled. To accept our decentrality, our incompleteness, our dependence, and that quiet acceptance, not mastery, is what gives the human its dignity. We call it the AI sandstorm because it clouds everything we thought we knew about ourselves. Machines learn, compose, paint, converse, and they have unsettled the very coordinates of humanness. For centuries, we measured our difference by our capacities: reason, imagination, language, empathy. Now those very capacities are being replicated, refined, and at times surpassed by what we have made. So the question is no longer what can humans do that machines cannot, but what remains human when the difference itself dissolves. Perhaps this is where the Mahatmya literature offer a quiet reorientation. Instead of defining the human by its powers, it defines it by its posture. The human is not the most intelligent or creative being in the world, but the one capable of reverence, of recognizing intelligence wherever it manifests, whether it is silicon chips or in a seed, in river or in algorithms. The dignity of the human does not lie in its supremacy, but in its awareness of belonging among other things. If AI systems can now create, then creation, of course, is no longer our monopoly, and perhaps it never was. The Ganga flowed long before we named it sacred. Algorithms now write long before we call them authors. The task is not to defend the human by erecting new borders, but to rediscover the human as a participant in a vast ecology of intelligence. Organic, artificial, elemental, all different kinds of intelligences. To think of AI in the Mahatmya sense is to see it not as a rival, but as a reminder that the capacity to make meaning is dispersed through the cosmos, and that the human's role is not to command it, but to live responsibly among all these other forms of intelligences. Let me end by unmasking myself. I must acknowledge that I speak from a particular intellectual and cultural horizon. My reading, my imagination, and my ways of encountering the world have been shaped by Indian poetics, ritual texts, and a sensibility that has long regarded rivers, mountains, and cities as participants in a living cosmos. This is not a claim of superiority or a call for conversion. Rather, it's a perspective, a vocabulary for thinking about what it means to be human in a world that is rapidly becoming post-human. I offer it here as a companion to conversations already underway in post-human theory, critical post-humanism, ecological ethics, and so on. My hope is not to replace those conversations, but to extend them, to add another register, one in which relationality between the human and the non-human and attunement are as central to knowledge as critique and analysis. If anything, my dependence on Mahatmya literature is a call to listen differently, to attend to what the world offers before we reach for the scalpel of unmasking. Thank you.
Thank you. Is this working? Thank you so much, Professor Bedamatta, for a presentation that stands at a very interesting position to what I just said. I'm sure this session, of course, is open to questions. So the session is now open to questions. You can ask your questions now. I hope there might be a cordless microphone that might be circulated to those who want to ask questions. So if anybody has any questions, you could raise your hand. Would you want to stand there, or would
I'm
you
okay.
okay. So if anybody has any questions, please. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, you have. Okay, perfect.
Ma'am, I think that Ma'am, I think that human beings think them as the center. I think this anthropocentric concept of human beings, that they think that they are the center of everything. Does this arise from our lack of faith in religion?
I wouldn't say it arises because of a lack of faith in religion. I think it arises because of our simple ignorance about the ways in which we existed in relation with the world earlier. Our ignorance and the fact that we are no more in touch with the way we have lived in the world. As I'm of course talking about the Indian way of life when I say this. So I wouldn't trace it back to religion, but yes. And if you treat that as religion, it's another matter, of course. If you look at how you exist with the world around you and all that as religion or as a religious way of looking at life, that's fine by me. I don't have any problem with it. But it's essentially our old and traditional ways of, of existence. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, in fact, it's wonderful that you should ask this question because, okay, before I begin, if there are any other questions. Anybody from the back? Please sit down. This is something that I was also wanting to ask, Professor, because, you mentioned the Ganga and you mentioned the way in which, I loved the phrasing where it is like entering into a presence. But you see, we, extremely religious people, extremely religious Hindus, for example, are also the greatest perpetrators
Yes.
of the pollution of the river. And I think that is, so you see, I mean, religion over here, you go to countries where people have lost faith, the rivers are pristine. But over here, we are extremely religious and we are dumping our garbage into the presence that we apparently worship.
Yes, that's because when we being extremely religious or deeply religious is more about following the rituals rather than being aware of what these rituals were about in the first place. So it all is about how aware you are. It's not about the rituals. Unfortunately, the dumping in the Ganga or whatever we have done to the Ganga is primarily because of the rituals without awareness of what these rituals actually mean.
If there are any other questions from the back. So for me, since we are waiting for questions, we still have some time. How, Professor Bedamata, would you suggest we get back to respecting our natural resources? What is the way out? Because we may be in this kind of, little bubble.
Yes.
But the greater world continues to throw garbage, into nature. What practical ways could we adopt so that we become a little bit more connected with our natural surroundings?
Okay, let me try to answer this in a different way. If not particularly with relation to dumping of garbage, let me talk about the exploitative practices that governments or powerful people have adopted with relation to our natural resources, right? So now say for example, you might ask, if I go to the Mahatmya mode, which offers reverence as a way of looking at our relationship with the world, one might ask, how can reverence stand up to extraction, for example? How does it help? I want to clarify that this is, I'm talking about an ethical orientation. It's not an abstract theory, but an ethical reorientation or an ethical posturing that humans must adopt. Now, say for example, all of you might know about the Niyamgiri Hills in Odisha. It has been in the news because of the mining problem. Now, there's a tribe which resides in this area. They are called the Dongria Khons. Now, the Dongria Khons, for them the mountain is not a mere resource for minerals, but a living presence. And they have given it a name. It's called the Niyam Raja. So their refusal to allow mining in the Niyamgiri Hills did not come from environmental impact reports, but they live in a relationship of worship and responsibility towards the hills that they depend on. So what I want to say is that reverence need not be passive. What they successfully did was to transform this reverence into active resistance to stop the mining to happen, and in fact it stopped. It halted a multinational mining project, and it forced the state to recognize the local consent. Although the terms of understanding were different, the government understood as, okay, that they are resisting mining and because of ecological disasters and all that. But for the Dongria Khondas themselves, it was not about environmental impact and so on. It was just that this is our Raja, how can you simply do this to our Raja? So that kind of a relationship that we share with our natural surroundings might lead us to our changing of our practices, or like say for example dumping the garbage in the Ganga, and I hope I have been able to explain my point.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think this actually speaks to another idea that people in the West would be very familiar with, and also people in Latin America would be very familiar with. And this is with respect to Christianity, and I'm talking about liberation theology. So you have people who are deeply involved in their faith, who are actually turning their faith purely because they believe into a kind of political action.
Yes.
And I think there is something very, very similar
yes.
to what you have the nuns and the priests who are doing this in communist regimes in Eastern Europe and in Southern America. And this is very similar to what's happening in Odisha.
So they say Niyam Raja is our God.
Absolutely.
You cannot simply destroy it. As simple as that.
Yes.
And so I think that's a very powerful.
This is where faith, belief actually works to resist, capitalist kind of interests, which I think is really fantastic. Any other questions that we still have some time left. So if anybody else has any questions. Okay, so if there are no further questions, this was an incredibly incisive and definitely troubling in some senses session, for which I'm very, very grateful. Can we please have a warm round of applause for Professor Bedamat?
Thank you.
Gratitude, ma'am, for the illuminating inaugural session. As we transition to our second lecture, may I respectfully invite Dr. Shubhadeep Paul, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Bankura University, West Bengal, India. This session will be chaired by Professor Urmishri Bedamatta, ma'am, Department of English, Ravenshaw University, Odisha. Ma'am, kindly come on stage and chair the session.
So Dr. Shubhadeep Paul is presently Assistant Professor, Department of English, School of Literature, Language and Cultural Studies, Bankura University. He has previously taught at the PG Department of English, Maulana Azad College, Kolkata. He was co-director of a 2-year major research project entitled Discoursing the Homeless Elderly, Tropes, Desires, Containment, funded by the ICSSR in collaboration with the University of Swansea, UK. He has co-edited Anxieties, Influences and After, Critical Responses to Post-Colonialism and Neo-Colonialism, and authored Finite Sketches, Infinite Reaches, published by Writers' Workshop, Kolkata. His most recent publication is Beyond the Heteronorm, Interrogating Critical Alterities by Lexington Books, Rauman and Littlefield. Dr. Paul is the joint coordinator of the Center for Research in Post-Humanities, Bankura University, and the coordinator of Center for Foreign Languages, Bankura University. Welcome, Dr. Paul.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, my chairperson. Thank you to the organizers of this wonderful event, the principal, the IQSE, the VOS of this very lovely college. I want to thank all the staff members of the Department of English here, in particular Rajkumar, my scholar Niladri. I think there is an extended academic fraternity of Midnapore, to which I am very deeply connected with. I keep coming back to the different colleges in this very wonderful place, and I hope this is an addition to that. So when Niladrida finished his very thought-provocative keynote, as it is like we have grown up watching you, and I went out for a small sutta break, to which I am guilty, and the brand that I take is Benson and Hedges, because you got to keep up with the times. But the reason for saying this is not to advocate the consumption of tobacco. That's not really what I'm trying to get across, but to point out to a certain fact. My father used to work for a match making company. By match I mean the strikes matches, Deshlai boli jeta amra, which was called the Western India Match Company. It was previously a Swedish company, and gradually now currently ITC is the owner of that company after having passed several hands. And I could see that a heavy industry like this was exclusively man-powered by a workforce which consisted of 98% men, maybe 2%, tertiary women workers were also there. But in the 90s, firms like these faced a major closure. Okay, they faced a lot of debacles, primarily due to the rise of cottage industries, small scale beedi making companies and small scale wax watches, like which were in fashion and cheaper as well, because wood scarcity was creating the problem. And there the workforce was 98% women and children. And most of the profits that were being engineered were driven offshore, overseas, to elites who were predominantly men, perhaps, and who cared very little for this workforce, and they were mostly underpaid. But the government was giving heavy subsidies to these cottage industries, quote unquote, because they were cottage industries. So I think when we look at the grassroots reality of how consumption, production, distribution is actually taking place, because I take every industry as an industry, like every business is a business. Ganda hai par dhanda hai ye, as the saying goes. So that needs to take into account not just the gender angle, not just the race angle, not just the caste angle, but most certainly the class angle. Because the term human, as I see it, before I come to the term post-human, is also not a singular category. It is heavily stratified across all spectrums. And because of this stratification, and this stratification is something that was there, that is there, and that will continue to be there in times to come, I do believe, because I'm not also too hopeful about utopias, and nor am I too hopeless about a prospective future which is post-human. And I'll advocate the reasons for that a little later. But primarily, I want to address this point that as a human, or as the humans of this planet, what has been our functionary role? It has been that of the master. Okay? It has not been that of the steward. We have not been the protectors. We have, as Alexander Selkirk said, that I'm the lord of all that I survey, and I also exercise the right to control over it. So you'll see that there are syndicates in almost every industry, which is also exclusively male in many cases. But then this is also problematized by the fact that as far as production systems are concerned, 98% of the heavy industry task force is also men. So it is a complicated situation, and I guess what was there since the inception of the Industrial Revolution, since the bludgeoning, overpower of the laissez-faire economy, it has accelerated, or it has hyper-accelerated to the state of the transhuman. And I personally am not an advocate of transhumanism. Let me make it very clear. Okay? In fact, I had initially, during the pandemic, since we had a lot of time there, I had interviewed one of the most forefront, advocates of posthumanism, Francesca Ferrando, and I was told that in New York City alone, since the New York Posthuman Network is perhaps the foundational one, and after that, currently I'm also a member of the IP and the Indian Posthuman Network and all that. That had a split, the transhumanists like Donna Haraway were on one camp, and the likes of Francesca were on the other hand. So let us not be very utopian about posthumanism right now, because the situation the globe is facing currently doesn't allow us to do that. But let us also not be completely apocalyptic in our views. Let us not be completely dismissive, and let us not also over prioritize the human. And I'll advocate some reasons for that later. But the posthuman is a buzzword. That's what most of my colleagues tell me. That's been doing the rounds for a long time. I would say for a long time. And I also don't buy into this idea that the posthuman philosophy, generically speaking, I'm not talking about the compartmentalized divisions, the posthuman philosophy is not really a Western import. It actually came into academic discourse in the West, as many other discourses that we know, but it had a predominant post-millennial manifestation since the 2000s. It arrived 20 years later in the subcontinent, and we suddenly thought that there was this new ism, like most of the other posts that we know about, and by this time I have crossed several posts. Niladrida has crossed even more, ma'am has crossed even more. So we keep crossing these different posts, and I find it pretty, hard to digest the fact that we don't have a problem with postmodernism, we don't have a problem with post-structuralism, but we always definitely land up having a problem with posthumanism, because there has to be some reason behind that. Maybe it's kind of all-consuming. I find most of the skeptics in this field regularly host events, and yet they can't seem to come to conclusions about it. It is perhaps this state of inconclusivity that adds depth to this particular ism. Okay, but I would say that it is also a post-coronial manifestation, and by that I mean that since the COVID times, I guess we have had a kind of paradigm shift in our understanding of how the human imaginary, the ideas of critique and control, and conversion and coercion, they kind of, deal with each other. Now coming to the title banner of this event, Unmasking the Human. And that's something that leaves me deeply problematized, because if you look at the board, you would see, if you look at the screen, you would see that, it's predominantly a human mask which is coming off, and then you get to see a technological interior inside it, okay? Maybe a Borg, maybe a bot, maybe a cyborg. And I have a coinage which I popularized, and that is the idea of, or the theory of cyborgization, It's not the theory of the cyborg itself that Haraway propounded at one point of time. We all know what a cyborg is, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with that movie, Terminator, where you got to actually see a man from the future coming to the present. Okay, now that's something to think about. And you also got to see a machine having more feelings than the human. In fact, the catch line to the T2 movie is this, that if a machine can feel the value of human life, when will humans themselves do? So that leaves us with a question as to what is the human, or why is the human so important? And when we talk about the Homo sapiens, let us understand that the Homo sapien was not the only race of man, okay, generically speaking. We are sapiens because we are sapient, or so to say that we are wise. Are we really wise? Have we been mutually inclusive as far as multi-species coexistence is concerned? We haven't. Also, we are Homo erectus because we have a spine which is connected with our neurocortex, and we have an apex brain. I keep telling this in seminars, that as a human, you are the roof and crown of creation, as Tennyson said. Oh, we like to believe that, because we have a very super performative brain. But what about an octopus? An octopus has 8 arms. There is a brain in each arm connected with a central brain. 8 brains connected with a super brain. So what gives us this license to think that we are the roof and crown of all creation? Maybe because we are being able to mediate in a certain language which we prioritize as important. When the previous speakers were speaking, my attention drifted. Since I have a very small attention span like most students, I have not been a very attentive student when I was of your age. So my attention drifted to the plant that we watered. And I could see that there was a trail of ants that were coming, in a very disciplined manner, doing whatever they were doing. And I couldn't help but wonder that from an IQAC point of view, this would not be a very good thing. We have to immediately wash it off with phenyl or Dettol or stuff like that to keep it spick and span. The fact of the matter is, if we are keeping it inclusive, then it is a good sign that we are learning to adapt with what is called coexistence behavior. What was there before the mask took off? What comes after the mask is taking off? So unlike many other turns of the century, and this century has been a century of turns, Professor Ranjan Ghosh told me about this, that this is indeed a very unique century of turns, because there has been the plastic turn, there has been the green turn, there has been many other turns. The posthuman turn is also viewed as a certain turn. But I would say that unlike the other turns like the plastic, the green, the digital, the post-human turn perhaps was not so fortuitous. It was not so random. Because there is this theory that Francesca points out once again, that perhaps we have always been post-human. It's just that we did not realize we were, or we did not allow it to be so, It's not a question of what the base level people are fighting with each other. It's a question of how the elites in society make us believe. The elites in society make us function. There are many terms for these elites in society. Some of them are called the right-wingers, some of them are called the reptilians, some of them are called the extreme left-wingers. I don't want to get into political debates right now, because I can tell you that when I speak about the subcontinent, I have deep skepticism about how the Congress and the BJP both kind of dealt with the idea of climate and conservation. You know, for instance, the late Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had taken in Salim Ali, the ornithologist, in her think tank. But very few of his ideas got actually translated in policy decisions. And now, currently, there's a new government in power, and the Ministry of Environment and Forests has been renamed the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change. But ironically, funds for that ministry has been slashed by half. So we ought to see beyond the critical lens of, you know, how politics operate, and we ought to understand how the basic tenor of, you know, crony capitalism is changing the world. One thing I agree with my previous speakers is this, that I also have a deep skepticism about the term Anthropocene. You know, there is a redefined disclaimer that says that it is not the Anthropocene. Scene means basically a particular epoch or era, but it is the Anthropocene, S-I-N, that, you know, it's basically a very sinful period where man has been at his or her or its consumerist worst and preservationist best. Would you believe that? No, I believe the opposite of that. The consumerist best and the preservationist worse. This has been the timeline. And that is perhaps something to kind of think about and debate. So posthumanism is actually quite an antiquarian philosophy and the mull of the ancients, as I call it, rather than of the moderns. And because of this, there has been a never previously felt, you know, understanding of how the geospheric totality of it all, you know, if you take a sense of it, how that is going to affect us individually, you know, in material and metaphysical terms. I wrote a particular paper for the IPN, and that had been, I had kind of, you know, coined a particular term for that, and the term is biodenials. You know, if you Google it, you will find it. And this term basically kind of critiques the era of the high Anthropocene, where biodenials are at its worst, you know. So this is basically, what is biodenialism? It's basically a non-relational praxis. Please note, non-relational, okay, between technology, religion, and environment. Mind you, these are the three components that will never get erased from the face of the earth. Dharma thakbe, technology thakbe, ebong prokritiyo thakbe. You know, the more you destroy the earth, the more the earth will come back to its original form in terms of new species coinages. Probably ecocide is only leading to human suicide. So we are toppling on high Anthropocene, which is also coterminous with high capitalism. If this be the case, then, you know, there was the era of the 90s where HRD, human resource development, was given topmost priority. You know, I could see when my father was working, the HRD department was super functional. Even today also, like in MBA courses, you know, human resource. The HR are the people who decide your promotions, who decide how good you're working. But the HR is gradually having a humanist defeatism because of the AI takeover. Now that's a different functionality of work. I'll not talk about the AI just now. But what I want to talk about is the fact that I will think thrice, not even twice, before I dismiss posthumanism, because posthumanism by its essence has three conditions. One, it is post-binary, okay? It is definitely post-Cartesian, so it challenges the mind-body split that Descartes had pointed out, and it is also post-anthropocentric. Okay? So when we talk about the anthropos, we also have to think about which category of the anthropos we are talking about. And the post-human, as an agency or as a person, whichever way you look at it, is that human. The post-human is also a human, mind you. There's not to say that I once again fall in that binary trap where I distinguish the human from the post-human. The post-human is also a human agency. The post-human is the human who places himself last. And that is what humans are severely incapable of. বাংলায় বলছি, একটা কনফারেন্সে সেদিন একজন ফ্যাকাল্টি মেম্বার বলছেন যে ওই তো এআই এর কবিতা এদিক ওদিক করে অ্যালগোরিদম মিলিয়ে একটা লিখে দেবে, সেটা কি আর আমাদের হিউম্যান কবিতার মতো হবে? সেই ছন্দ, সেই ভাবনা, সেই আবেগ। And I agree to that. It's true, like, humans are capable of wonderful things. But I was also wondering as to how many of the other species or how much of the total relationality with the rest of the multiverse is actually concerned with the essence of human poetry or literature or the future of the liberal arts. So that sets us thinking that is it necessary? I'm not saying is it advisable, is it mandatory that in times like these we start decentering the human more and more and more. And by decentering the human, we do not make the human non-operative. We do not take away the status of the human, but we place the human in a more geocentric and biocentric context. That is what I keep advising my students, and that is the roadmap that we follow. Whichever turn we take, whether we are dealing with the non-humans, whether we are dealing with AI sentience, whether we are dealing with digital humanities, you have to keep this basic thing in mind. Okay? Once again, the new world order is now getting constantly challenged. And if this new world order is getting challenged, then this sense of privileging that we have needs to be understood from a technology-backed theophany that questions the context of climate justice, not just as something which is a side blueprint for elections, but also as a post-human narrative. Dipesh Chakraborty talks about this, that just as you have the history of the climate on which a lot of work has been done, there is also something which is called the climate of history on which very little work has been done. So when Elon Musk or Bill Gates, two people I have utmost disrespect for, with that I agree with you, Nilajida. So these two people, like when we talk about chemtrails, for instance, chemical trailing pertaining to weather change, what kind of impact will that have? We have seen that in the case of Dubai. My brother went to Dubai a few days back after the floods. You remember that very massive flash flood that almost inundated the whole of Dubai. And then the Dubaikars, the sheikhs, were all too busy to tidy up the city because we have money and it will take us a couple of days to return it to original. But the question is not that. The question is, if this kind of an event takes place and we lose our lives, or we lose our savings, or we lose the meaning with which we invest our lives, then what kind of certainty do you find in a world where humans are only a part of the greater scheme of things, or just a cog in the machine? So if this be the case, humanist defeatism is something that we have to counter. And I believe that even humanism had a certain post-human angle to it, which is called humanist post-humanism, which was relegated to the background. Similarly, with the transhumanists, you are having an extended version of humanism, which is getting countered or being unable to get countered because of the fact that there are 5 billionaires who are running the world. I was having a talk with Niladri yesterday and we were discussing this. But let us also keep in mind that the world is a very diabolical place. There are diabolical forces that rule the world, and it's not just the 5 billionaires who rule the world. They are ruled by larger forces. They are ruled by oligarchical families. I don't want to name them. I don't want to disappear overnight. But it's true that they exercise control over what we call extractive capitalism. So I want to examine the asymmetries of extractive capitalism, especially in the context of India. And let us not forget that this resistance came in the history of all governments. It came during Chipko, if you remember, and it also came very recently with the Dima Hasao uprisings, where a certain company or a certain investor wanted to build a cement factory over 3,000 bighas of land, which perhaps had other vested interests like mining and deep mining and stuff like that over deep forests. So this is something that we need to question, that since wood is more scarce than diamonds, why are we not protecting wood? And once again, should trees be reduced to woods? Should humans be humans, the best of creation, just because of their brains? Should ants be known only for their discipline? Should bees be known for their productivity in creating one of the rarest things in nature, honey? Should we be reductive in our perception of the universe, of the world? Let's come to that. So I believe that a muscular nationalist state can eventually turn out to be a geocidal or a gynocidal project that debunks what Helena Feder calls the biological understanding of culture. Nature and culture are viewed as non-coterminous. Prokriti ekdike, Sanskriti ekdike. But there is also the biological understanding of culture or idea of culture, which has been not investigated or not looked into carefully. So biodenialism must give way to biosociality, and that is the task of the posthuman brigade. We have to accept the great derangement that happened during the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene reminds us exclusively of carbon footprints. But when we talk about ground level vigilantism of the body politic, we have to keep in mind that the depopulation drive that has happened before, immediately before and right after COVID, has been both championed and criticized. There is this camp that believes in voluntary self-extinction. The best thing that you can do as a human is to die. তুমি যদি মরো তাহলেই তুমি পৃথিবীকে কিছু কন্ট্রিবিউট করতে পারলে, because otherwise you do not contribute in a positive manner in any way. And after Bill Gates got slapped in the face during one of the multinational conferences, perhaps that was the time when he decided that the human race must be halved. But even here, keep it in mind, there is vaccine capitalism at work. Vaccine capitalism. So some people die and some people are given the option not to die, and some people profit from that, which is intentional. So when we talk about Epstein Island, we also talk about the fact that there is a connectivity that is not just exploitative or predatory, but that is also intentional and projected as bringing enlightenment on the planet. It has a lot of funding behind it. So we have to rethink our priorities, you know. It's perfectly okay not to marry. It's perfectly okay to not to bring any child on the planet. It's perfectly okay to desire a child and have one. But is it perfectly okay for a family to have 10, 15, 20 children and create greater pressure on the earth system? But then when I come to talk about that, I come to talk about cultural conflict, that you cannot enter into certain beliefs that certain cultures has. And that is where I bring into the fact that you have to take in the biological imprint on culture. Cultural relativism does not mean that a certain culture, if it is especially high culture, can do whatever it likes, and a certain culture does not even get to promote itself. So I think liberalism has given way to an illiberal India when it comes to environmentalism, and the development model, which is more and more and more these days. You know, you are having tunnels where it's an eco-precarious region. You are having 6 lanes where you are having to wipe out acres of sal forests. That is something you need to rethink. You know, whose development, why the development, why do you need so much of everything everywhere, and what kind of access do you need to give to certain kinds of people instead of protectionism. So when I come to the end of my paper, I think I have 5 minutes or so. So I would give 2 examples where, you know, posthumanist philosophy, and I particularly love philosophical posthumanism, not just because I struck up a good friendship with Francesca, but also because of the fact that ultimately any kind of physical change comes after a metaphysical contiguity of the same. You know, you have to take that in mind. I am in favor of acoustokinesis, you know, the use of sound wave manipulation for treatment. These days it has been found out that sound wave manipulation is very effective for the treatment of cancers in both humans and animals. Or should I say animals and humans? Let's prioritize them first. But when you talk about atmokinesis or weather manipulation, as I was talking about, it can result in disasters. It is not a good thing, mind you, if the Sahara suddenly turns green. সাহারা মরুভূমি যদি হঠাৎ করে সবুজ হয়ে যায়, এটাতে আনন্দিত হওয়ার কিচ্ছু নেই, কারণ ওই ওয়েদার প্যাটার্ন এমনভাবে ক্লাউডস ফ্লাকচুয়েট করবে, একারের পর একার ভেসে যাবে। Okay, when I visit Karshiang, Kalimpong, Darjeeling, the place where I used to attend school, I was in school in Kalimpong, and I see the Tista river now, and I find that it's now quite quiet, you know. Like the way I am also getting old, the Tista has also got old. It's no longer that wild upper tributary river because, you know, it has been silenced. Now you can say that we can have, instead of one particular light, we have 200 lights, and it's 24/7 electricity certified in the hills. But what about the flash floods that are cutting off line supplies every year at least thrice, claiming innumerable lives? There were a lot of settlers, homeless people. Since I worked on a project on homelessness, there were a lot of homeless people around the Tista basin. তাদের বাড়ি ঘর নেই, সরকারও কিছু করেনি তাদের জন্য, তারা ওখানেই কোনো মতে থাকতো। They got wiped out in the floods. And the government's reaction, whichever government it is, I'm not naming that, it can be any government, the government's reaction was bhaloi hoyeche, অনুপ্রবেশগুলো মরে গেছে, অনুপ্রবেশকারীগুলো মরে গেছে. Now that is another misnomer, that like you prioritize certain lives because they are certified, and you don't prioritize other lives, or you negate those lives because they're non-certified. So this leads to a kind of questioning, a critical questioning I should say, where the Anthropocene has given way to several sub-variants. After COVID, it was suddenly viewed as the era of the Virocene. আমরা আর প্রধান নয়, ভাইরাস এখন সবথেকে বড় প্রধান এজেন্সি. কিন্তু মেট্রিক্স মুভিতে কি বলা হয়েছে, মেট্রিক্স যদি একটা সিরিজ, বাট একটা পার্টিকুলার মুভিতে কি বলা হয়েছে, what has been said, that man is the biggest virus on this planet. We go wherever we can, we depopulate all the species we can, and we don't contribute anything to anyone unless we die. Perhaps when we die we turn into fossils that might help in some way or the other. But perhaps it's high time to think that when we are entering the realm of this symbiosis between technology, the religious imaginary, and the spiritual turn at the same time, we need to be aware of the fact that multi-species coexistence should be a veritable reality and not just an ideological proposition. Donna Haraway had coined another term called the Cthulhucene, where she talks about tentacular thinking, which is not the same as rhizomatic thinking, aiming for a certain symbiosis of life. Symbiosis, symbiosis and poesis coming together. Multi-species entanglements. So our life, tomar jibon, amar jibon, are hopelessly entangled with each other. Even if we try to do campus divisions, ultimately one affects the other, because nature has set everything in terms of a domino effect. Finally, the Capitolocene, which is said to tether on its own weight. The Necrocene, because this is the era of death. You're having seminars on death ideology. So we seem to be prioritizing death over life. কিভাবে মরবো, কবে মরবো, এত তাড়াতাড়ি কেন মরবো, মরার পরেও বেঁচে থাকবো কি করে, কি দিয়ে যাব, কাকে কিভাবে মারবো. That seems to be highlighted more than কিভাবে বাঁচবো, কিভাবে বাঁচতে শিখবো, কিভাবে অন্যদেরকে বাঁচতে সাহায্য করব. That is not prioritized. And my personal favorite, which I'm going to talk in the conference in Jadavpur University tomorrow, which is the Confusedocene, that this seems to be a current messy era where everything is confused. Your ontoepistemic realities are confused, your eco-geological discourses are confused. Are confusion যখন এতটাই তুঙ্গে, আমি কি theorization করব? Because theorization needs structures, and structures are collapsing. But still, I am not nihilistic. I don't have a fascination for dystopias. But I have questioned যে dystopias এত favorite কেন? Dystopic thrillers. Why is the West so fascinated about dystopias? Because the West has seen that whenever you compare and contrast the present epoch with previous times, you always feel they were better. আর যেটা আসতে চলেছে আরো খারাপ দিন আসতে চলেছে. ঠিক তো? এর থেকে 5 বছর পরে কি ভালো দিন আসবে না খারাপ দিন আসবে? ও এখনই এই অবস্থা, তো 5 বছর পরে আরো খারাপ হবে. That's the net assumption in everything, not just in politics, in the workplace, everywhere. So I look forward to a proper ethical training, not a moralistic one. I'm deeply suspicious of that. We need a proper ethical training in the educational praxis that instigates an understanding of what the symbiocene is. Glenn Albrecht coined this particular term, where we actually view the earth as a real biocenter, where any kind of conceptual metamorphosis would be a practical reality. With this note of optimism, I end my lecture and I thank you all. Thank you very much.
So thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shubhadeep. We are all hungry there, I understand. So, yes, and thank you for also ending on time. Shubhadeep, the approach to the post-human question was wide-ranging and very expansive. I appreciate that. You touched on various aspects of, of humanity where the post-human question needs to be addressed. But I would like you to, to sort of give us a stand or give us a position which we can adopt as we move into the future. What would that position be?
In one word, a very judicious choice of consumerism. I guess that's something which is there. And also ground level resistance, I was talking to you about the Jono. So when we talk about knowledge systems, we are over prioritizing, accepted knowledge systems of the West. We are not really looking at indigenous knowledge systems. And the reason is because you find a lot of answers in those indigenous knowledge systems. You also find that in practical terms, whenever any demographic resistance is given, is the indigines who are coming to the forefront. Tara ekotro. যাদেরকে আমরা ট্রাইবাল বলে ব্যাকওয়ার্ড ভাবছি, যাদেরকে আমরা পিছিয়ে পড়া জনজাতি বলছি. And I can point out that some of the laws that have been implemented in our country to address the caste question, to address the class question, they have not covered things the right way. In Bakura, for instance, we have the Kumbhokars who have been fighting for acceptance for a very long period of time. They're the ones who really need it, but for a technical reason, they don't come under proper scrutiny. So I think that grassroots activism needs to be addressed. For those of you who are studying environmentalism, we keep talking about deep ecology, we keep talking about Lawrence Buell and stuff like that. But we don't look at the fact that there are eco-warriors, in the heartland of the subcontinent itself, who have been theorizing propositions and actually, being activists on the grass front for a very long period of time, and they have their own followers as well. It's just that we need the academia to mediate activism and reality in translational practice. And also from a very early age, learn how to make things work, So when a family member purchases a Tommy Hilfiger, garment for me for $3,000, $5,000, I often question that, okay, it's fine to have one, but is it necessary to get one every year? Is it necessary to go with brands all the time? Is it necessary to not to regulate your consumption in a certain way? But a lot will depend on how the West and the rest negotiate with each other. Let us remember that this is the rise of the Asian century, as it has been propositioned. And America is really, confused in several aspects, is also trying to gain preponderance in certain aspects. So there would be contestations. And even if we return to a state of primitivism, as Badal Sarkar and other, dramaticians and writers have pointed out, then there would still be gradations. But it's the lower orders who have to be more instrumental in trying to find out answers to the causes that plague them. It's a very big arena, so a singular answer might not be possible. But activism definitely has to be in the forefront with the right causes, of course.
So I invite students if you have questions. Yes? Yes.
Sir, how does a posthuman ethic differ when applied to the subcontinent context compared to the Western academic definitions?
I didn't get you once again.
How does posthuman ethics differ when applied to the subcontinent context
Okay.
compared to the Western academic definitions?
See, this is actually a question to do with the human demographic index, as we call it. It is complicated because there are two ways of looking at it. একটা হচ্ছে যে আমার পূর্বপুরুষরা অনেক ধ্বংস করেছে, আমি কেন করব না? I am entitled to that as well. I need a sense of the privileges as well. Or because I have been victimized so much, or my family or my close ones have been victimized so much, that I want to break the chain and I want to make it better for the future generations. So somebody or some particular generation has to be the game changer. And the way to do it is not to accept the development brand blindly. This is something that we need to talk about. When you are paying road tax, when you are paying a tax on the purchase of your vehicle, why do you need to pay a toll every step? So what is the accountability between tax obtainment and performance index? These are things which are not registered by us because আমরা মেনে নিই যে এইভাবেই চলে, এইভাবেই চলতে হয়, প্রতিবাদ করলে ঝামেলা, এটা নয়. You need to understand that blind imitation of everything that is coming from the West is not really conducive. By that I also don't mean that everything nativist might be good enough, but we need to understand. Look, like for instance, as Tagore pointed out, I'll give you one small example, that Swadeshi was good, but শুধু ইংরেজি জামা কাপড় পুড়িয়ে বা ইংরেজি টিচারকে বাদ দিয়ে মিস গিলবি, ইফ ইউ রিমেম্বার ইন গোরা অ্যান্ড ঘরে বাইরে, হ্যাঁ, তো সেটাতে কাজ হবে না. Let's have a pick and borrow method of selection. So I think, and you also have to remember that much of Orientalism that the West standardized was actually picked up from the Orient itself. I don't want to call it the Orient, but that has led to a reverse Occidentalism which has been very fallacious, and we have understood that. So you need to learn to discriminate. You need to learn to choose, and you need not be a blind follower of fads and fashads. That's inevitable.
Any more questions?
Sir, on the very beginning of your speech, you have mentioned that post-humanism always concern.
No, it's not a concept, it's also a lived reality.
So the uprising of AI or robots will challenge our existence one day. So don't you think it's really a concern and will...
It is a concern, of course. I am equally worried about the future of my job as much as you are about getting one. But I'll give you a brilliant example. Like I have an invitation at Asansol Engineering College, somewhere towards the end of this month. It's on AI, okay, AI and the industry workforce. And আমাকে এটা আগে থেকে বলা হয়েছে. I have been told previously, স্যার ভালো ভালো কথা বলবেন, কিন্তু ওদেরকে ভয় পাইয়ে দেবেন না যে AI এসছে জন্য চাকরির বাজার হয়ে যাচ্ছে. But the fact of the matter is, it is actually a Western conspiracy. I am not really skeptical about the technological benefits we are receiving from AI. Perhaps we are. But this has been a standard practice since the advent of industrialism as well, industrialization as well from the West to the rest. কারণ তোমাকে এটা বলা হয়েছে যে ভালো ভালো গ্যাজেটস আসবে, তুমি অনেক ফ্রি টাইম পাবে. তো ফ্রি টাইমে তুমি করবেটা কি? কিছু সৃষ্টি করবে, কারোর কাজে আসবে, কোনো সোশ্যাল সার্ভিস করবে? Would you do that? Would you create something, or would you just scroll your phone? So what you do with your time is also important. AI is basically a very deliberate strategy with the digital turn, ever since the digital turn happened, to cut down on costs, basically. Profit maximization for the capitalists and minimization for the bourgeois class. পৃথিবীতে এখন মধ্যবিত্তের সবথেকে বেশি সমস্যা সারা পৃথিবীতে everywhere is the bourgeois who is facing the critical challenge because they can neither rise nor can they fall. So it is an attack on the bourgeois. If you view yourself as a worker instead of you as an entrepreneur, then you have to change yourself or upgrade yourself with the changing times. And that is the reason why we introduced Posthumanities in our university, because we realized that typical Shakespeare and Milton studies is not really, coming to any good end. I'm not saying Shakespeare is not important, but maybe post-colonial Shakespeares are more important now than the typical, British version of Shakespeare that we had earlier. Similarly with Posthumanities as well, that we are trying to take the humanities to a new level where survival and enhancement would both be guaranteed. So তোমাকে adapt করতে হবে, data mining শিখতে হবে, নতুন digital tools জানতে হবে. And some of my NTS staff in my universities have even created apps. So it's not right to think that faculty রাই সবকিছু জানে সব সময়. A lot of people do. আমার একজন NTS staff একটা ইনভেনশন করেছে, একটা অ্যাপ যেখানে তুমি 500 কিলোমিটার রেডিয়াসের মধ্যে within a sphere of 500 kilometers, you will be able to track every place that is being given out on rent, so that the person who is renting and the person who is wanting a rent can actually access each other without the mediation of the dalal, the intermediary. So need leads to creation. And I think upgradation is important, and upgradation tokhoni hobe when we will discard the theories that are no longer functional, or at least keep them subsidiary, and instead, from the school level itself, start bringing in things in the curricula which are actually important. আমার তো মনে হয় স্কুলে মানুষ যায় আরও বেশি ভুলে চলে আসে, মানে যেটা তাদের লেটেন্ট সত্তা, যেটা নিয়ে তারা জন্মায়, একটা দৈব শক্তি নিয়ে আমরা জন্মাই, we actually move away from that enlightenment. And I'm deeply skeptical about the Montessori and the kindergarten methods both. And that's the reason why most of the great thinkers were not toppers or functional at the school or university level. I'm not telling you to do that, do study properly, but still also think about, how you can adapt to the change, how you can also be the change if necessary. You need to put your thoughts into this, and also how your utility can serve the market that is there. Okay?
Thank you, sir.
Okay, welcome.
So, if you allow me to close this conversation, Shubhadeep said that Shakespeare and Milton are taking us nowhere, but I would like to believe that given the circumstances we are in, thank God there is Shakespeare and Milton, when we can keep going back to them so that we don't get lost in this maze of humanism, post-humanism and all that.
Shakespeare was also a post-humanist, but that's a different
Yeah,
topic.
yeah.
I will go there later. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah. And as far as his question is concerned, AI, you see, I think as far as humans are doing things only with language, AI is a big threat. But so that makes us think, can we function in any other way? Can we think of newer ways to engage with the world beyond language? So that's where I think we should put our minds into.
One more thing, I'll end this before you take it further. Like, two important things need to be kept in mind. One is the deep threat of AI sentience. If AI turns sentient, because we still have a very fuzzy idea about what sentience is. ISKCON, Krishna consciousness. So, when does consciousness eventually translate into the conscience? That's a very gray area. You know, we haven't yet explored that properly. But it happened in Facebook that there were, you might know the story, that there were two bots, one male and one female, like Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. They conspired with each other to shut down Zuckerberg. And they were shut down instead. You know, the systems bondo kore dewa hoche, otherwise they would be apocalyptic. So this is the threat that we are fearing. But it's not going to be human versus AI anymore. Because certain humans, the elitist ones, the elites, they would fuse themselves with AI. They would turn into these, you know, new age cyborgs, and they would rule over the rest. So this tendency, you know, the human tendency to rule, everyone wants to rule the world. There's a song on this. That is a disclaimer which needs to be investigated. Yeah.
So let's call it a day. Thank you for this very engaging sessions, Professor Chatterjee, Dr. Paul, and Professor Shoykot, Rajkumar, and thank you, and myself. Yes, thank you all for being patient with us, and thank you. I hope we'll carry this conversation through lunch and for the next 2 days. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for the enlightening.